The tin cup struck the iron basin before Mara Bell made a sound. By the time her eyes opened, water was already falling across her face. Not rain, not mercy from heaven. Just a thin stream poured by an old rancher with cracked hands, and a face carved hard by wind. Mara lurched forward beside the pump, coughing like the water had dragged her back from somewhere darker. Her fingers clawed at the boards of the washstand. Her dress had been ripped at the hem, caked with red dirt, and stiff where blood had dried into the cloth. One boot was gone. Her lip was split, but her eyes did not beg. That was what stopped Elias Wren cold. He had seen fear. He had seen grief. He had buried a wife in alkali soil and a son under a mesquite tree after a fever took him in 2 nights. But the young woman at his pump looked past pain, past panic, straight into nothing, as if living had become one more chore she did not have the strength to finish. Elias was 61 years old, thin as fence wire, with a bad shoulder and a ranch that barely deserved the name. Coyote Bend sat 12 miles from Mercy Flats, where the New Mexico wind carried dust into every cupboard, and men learned early not to ask about trouble unless they were ready to marry it. Mara had collapsed beneath his windmill before dawn. She was not his daughter, not his hired hand, not his business. By the rules of that county, Elias lifted the cup again. The water touched her cheek and ran down into the basin, pink first, then red. Mara flinched, but she did not pull away. "Easy," Elias said. His voice sounded strange to him, softer than he had used it in years. She tried to speak. Nothing came out. Then, barely louder than breath, she asked, "Why did you stop?" Elias looked past her to the empty road, the pale horizon, the tracks leading east through the sand. "Because the road didn't," he said. That was the first cup. He carried her inside and laid her on the rope bed near the only window that opened clean. The cabin smelled of coffee, dust, old leather, and the bitter salve his wife used to make from sage. At noon, he brought broth in a chipped bowl and held the second cup to her mouth. She drank, like she expected the kindness to turn into a trick. By sundown, fever had come for her. Elias sat in the chair beside the bed with his rifle across his knees, listening to the boards creak and the coyotes crying beyond the wash. When the shaking took her, he pressed a cool cloth to her forehead. When the nightmares took her, he kept the lamp burning low. When she reached blindly for the wall, he put the cup in her hands, so she would know where she was. That was the third cup. He told himself it was only for one day. Morning water, noon broth, night watch. A man could afford 3 cups, even in a dry year. A man could do that much without pretending he was noble. But fever does not keep a gentleman's schedule. It tore through Mara for 2 nights and a day. She woke in pieces, never all at once. A name here, a warning there. A hand pressed hard to her ribs when she tried to sit. Elias learned not to ask too quickly. Hunted people measured every question like a trap. On the 3rd evening, as the sky turned the color of a bruise, Mara finally kept her eyes open long enough to see him clearly. "They'll come," she whispered. Elias was rinsing the cup. He did not turn around. "Who?" "The men from Rusk's room." That name changed the air in the cabin. Boone Rusk did not own Mercy Flats on paper. Men like him rarely needed paper for the things everyone already understood. He lent money to ranchers after droughts, held debts over widows, bought cattle cheap from desperate families, and kept a back room above the freight office where travelers sometimes disappeared from the town ledger. Before they disappeared from town, Elias set the cup down. Mara watched his face. "You know him." "I know what he sells." Her throat tightened. "He had my father's note. Said debt can pass from a dead man to a living daughter. Said a rail boss in Las Cruces wanted a quiet girl who had nowhere to run." Elias said nothing. Mara reached under the torn seam of her skirt and pulled free a folded strip of paper, soft with sweat. It was only half a page, ripped ragged down the middle, but the ink was plain enough. Names, dates, amounts, towns. Beside each name was a mark Elias had seen on Rusk's freight crates. "I took this," she said. "That's why they didn't leave me in town. That's why they left me for the coyotes." Elias held the paper by its edges. He had thought she was only a wounded woman. Now she was proof. By sunrise, he knew keeping her hidden would not be enough. Mercy Flats was already awake when Elias rode in. The town sat low under a dirty sky. One street of false front buildings, hitching posts and men who could forget anything for the right price. Nobody called out to him. Nobody asked why his shirt was stained with dried blood at the cuff. Sheriff Lyle Armitage stood outside the jail with a coffee cup in one hand, and sleep still gathered under his eyes. "Elias," he said, "heard you found something that belongs elsewhere." The sheriff sighed as if Elias had tracked mud onto a clean floor. "Best thing for everyone is to let Boone settle his own accounts." "A woman isn't an account." "Careful." That was when Boone Rusk stepped out of the freight office. He was broad, clean, shaven, and dressed too well for the dust around him. His boots shone. His hat was new. His smile had the patience of a man who believed every room had already made space for him. "Elias Wren," Rusk said, "I thought the desert had the good manners to swallow you years ago." Elias turned slowly. Rusk looked him over. Amused by the bad shoulder, the faded coat, the old revolver at his hip. "You are harboring stolen property." The street went still. Elias took one step off the boardwalk. "Say that again," he said. Rusk's smile thinned. Behind him, two of his men came out of the freight office and rested their thumbs near their gun belts. The sheriff did not move. Elias understood the whole town in that silence. Mara had not run from one man. She had run from a place that had agreed to look away. "She is on my land," Elias said. "She is breathing, and she will stay that way." Rusk's eyes hardened. Old men should spend their last years quietly. "They should," Elias said, "but some of us keep getting interrupted." He mounted and rode out without looking back, though he felt every stare between his shoulders. By late afternoon, the wind changed. Elias felt it before he saw the riders. The horses in the corral bunched near the far rail. The mule stopped chewing. Even the pump chain knocked once, then went still. Inside the cabin, Mara was sitting upright with the stolen paper wrapped in oilcloth and tied beneath her sleeve. Her face had more color now, but pain still lived around her mouth. "They won't wait for dark," she said. "No," Elias answered. "They'll wait until they think I am tired." He moved her to the root cellar under the pantry. The space was narrow, packed earth and stone, cool enough to hold potatoes through June. He gave her the revolver his wife had kept in the flour bin, and set the tin cup beside her hand. Mara looked at it. Elias nodded. "Third cup still counts." She almost smiled. Almost. The first shot came after moonrise. It broke the lantern glass hanging by the barn and sent flame crawling up the spilled oil. Elias was already off the porch and behind the water trough when the second shot tore through the cabin door. 3 riders came from the east fence. One man cut toward the corral. Another dragged a torch along the hay stacked for winter. They had not come to frighten him. They had come to erase the place. Elias fired once into the dirt ahead of the lead horse. The animal reared, screaming, and threw the rider sideways into the fence. The second man fired back. Splinters jumped from the trough near Elias's cheek. Another bullet caught him high along the ribs, hot enough to make his knees loosen, shallow enough to keep him standing. He moved through his own yard like a man reading a book he had memorized. 3 steps to the smokehouse. Reload. 2 steps to the woodpile. Wait for the muzzle flash. Fire low. Let the dark do what old bones could not. The barn wall caught. Flame climbed fast, orange and hungry. In that light, Elias saw Boone Rusk sitting his horse beyond the gate, far enough back to stay clean, close enough to watch. Rusk raised one hand. The man at the haystack turned toward the cabin. Elias understood before the torch left his hand. He shot the water barrel. The old barrel split with a sound like a cannon crack. A rush of water slammed across the yard, soaking the porch boards just as the torch landed. Steam rose. The flame died in a hiss. For one breath, everyone froze. Then Mara fired from beneath the pantry floor. The bullet punched up through a loose board and shattered the lamp near the doorway. Darkness swallowed the cabin. The men outside cursed, blind now, certain there were more guns than one old rancher and one half. Healed woman could possibly hold. That was enough. Boone Rusk wheeled his horse and vanished into the black. By dawn the barn was half ash, the hay was gone, and Elias had blood dried down his side. Mara came up from the cellar holding the cup in one hand, and the revolver in the other. The sheriff arrived after sunrise, slow as a funeral. He looked at the burned barn, the broken fence, the dead torch in the mud. Then he looked at Elias. "Storm lamp must have tipped," he said. Elias picked up the silver spur and held it out. The sheriff did not take it. "Boone will swear you fired first. He can swear in church if he likes. He will bring a warrant next time theft. Assault. Harboring a fugitive. Whatever paper fits." Mara stood in the doorway, pale but upright. The sheriff looked past Elias to her. For the first time, shame crossed his face, quick and useless. "Get her gone," he muttered. Before noon. Elias watched the dust settle behind him. The law was not coming. So he went to the shed, pulled down an old saddle, and packed as if the ranch had already become a memory. Coffee bandages, ammunition, 2 blankets. His wife's Bible, the torn ledger page sealed in oilcloth. He tied the silver spur to the outside of the saddlebag where it could clink against the buckle with every step. Mara saw it and asked, "Why carry that?" "So the road can hear what is chasing us." They left Coyote Bend before the sun reached the pump. Elias rode the mule because the mule knew canyon paths better than any horse alive. They cut north through dry washes and salt grass, away from the main road toward Bitter Springs, where an abandoned mission sat above an old irrigation ditch, and circuit judges sometimes stopped when the river road flooded. By afternoon, heat bent the horizon. Mara swayed once in the saddle. then straightened before Elias could speak. At the arroyo, she asked for the cup. Elias filled it from the canteen and handed it over. One cup when the sun climbed, one when it stood overhead, one before dark. Not a cure, not a bargain. A line drawn 3 times a day against the men who believed thirst made people easier to own. They were half a mile from Bitter Springs when Rusk caught them. 4 riders appeared along the ridge, black against the falling sun. Rusk came down the center, his horse picking careful steps over the stone. Sheriff Armitage was not with him. That meant Rusk had stopped pretending. "You made this expensive," Rusk called. Elias turned the mule sideways, putting himself between Rusk and Mara. Rusk's eyes moved to the saddlebag. He had heard the spur. Then he saw the oilcloth tied beneath Mara's sleeve. "Hand over my book," he said, "and I may let the old man die slow." Mara's hand shook, but she did not hide it. "It has names," she said, her voice carried clean across the arroyo. "Mine, Clara Boone from Silver City. Ruth Ames from Verde Crossing. 2 girls from the depot whose mothers still think they found work." Rusk's face changed. Not fear. Calculation. He lifted his pistol. Elias did not reach for his gun. Instead, he cut the rope tied around his saddle horn. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the old irrigation gate above the wash dropped open. Elias had ridden that country for 30 years. He knew which ditches still held water after a storm and which gates were too rotten to trust. That morning, when they passed the ridge, he had looped his rope through the release lever and dragged the loose end down into the arroyo. The first sheet of water hit the dry wash like glass breaking. It was not a flood. It was not enough to drown a man, but it was enough to turn powder dust into slick clay under 4 moving horses. Rusk's horse went sideways. One rider crashed into another. A pistol fired into the sky. Mara spurred forward as Elias swung the mule hard left, and together they crossed the stone shelf above the ditch, while Rusk's men fought mud, horses, and each other below. At the Mission Bell wall, 2 travelers and a circuit clerk came running at the noise. Mara did not collapse. She rode straight to them, pulled the oilcloth from her sleeve, and held out the torn page with both hands. "Read it," she said. By winter, Boone Rusk's freight office was locked. The back room above it was empty. Men who had laughed too loudly in Mercy Flats learned to speak softly when marshals rode through. Sheriff Armitage resigned before anyone asked him to. The ledger Mara carried did not save every woman named inside it, but it opened enough doors and enough graves for the county to stop pretending it had not known. Elias never went back to live at Coyote Bend. He and Mara stayed at Bitter Springs, where the mission walls kept out the worst of the wind and the old ditch still carried water when the gate was tended. They repaired the pump first, then the roof. Then the room where travelers could sleep without being asked what they were running from. At first, it was only Mara. Then a widow from a stage stop, then a boy with lash marks across his back. Then 2 sisters who arrived after midnight and did not give their names for 6 weeks. By the first snow, 9 people knew about the blue pump at Bitter Springs. No sign marked the place. No sermon announced it. Elias simply kept the cup on the table. Morning. Years later, people would say Elias Wren saved Mara Bell because he was brave. Mara knew better. Brave men could be cruel by breakfast. Brave men could ride past a body in the road and call it wisdom. Elias saved her because he made one small mercy into a rule, and obeyed it even when fear came armed. The first cup brought her back. The second taught her the hand could be trusted. The third reminded them both that a human life is not restored all at once. Sometimes redemption does not thunder across the sky. Water poured. And an old man choosing, again and again, not to let the world finish what cruelty started.